Well, once again, Friday rolls around. It is indeed Friday, and it's good to be back again. I've been off for a couple of weeks. Unfortunately, I've been crook, and luckily it wasn't COVID. And unfortunately, had a few family problems, and it's kind of put the kibosh on things. And I won't be here again next week. I'm off to the beautiful Auckland City to go and check it out once again, and play a bit of poker down at the Clare on Dominion Road. Looking forward to cleaning those boys out again. Well, we're not far out from an election today, and Michael and I were discussing things before we came on the show, so I certainly won't be talking about the upcoming election or people's decisions. We do not want to unduly influence anybody as far as marijuana reform goes, or end of life, or anything else. Those are your decisions to make and your vote to cast. So, we are not politicians at our radio, and we do not wish to unduly influence anybody as far as the upcoming elections go. It is up to every individual to take on board what's being told and to make their own minds up and cast their own vote. So, certainly people know my feelings on the matters, and I'm more than happy to discuss that personally on a one-on-one basis, but here and now is not the right platform for that. So I know that you'll all look to your hearts and vote accordingly. And, as my old friend Marcus Aurelius once said, each to his own. It is up to you to make your decisions. The things that I do want to talk about are things like my warnings, unfortunately, which went unheeded about an upcoming pandemic, and what do you know? COVID hits us, and once again my words went unheeded, and unfortunately we paid a big price. And I've also been talking about the scourge that peer has become on society. I mean, my show was about mental health, and I have seen the damage that it does. Children torn away from mothers, families destroyed, people physically addicted. You only have to go down to the pharmacy on a Monday morning to see those poor creatures queuing up to get their methadone, and you think, my oh my, what has society become, that lives can be destroyed in this way, and people can suffer such terrible mental health from nasty, evil drugs that really need to be eliminated from society. And that is one of the issues that I'm kind of trying to push at the moment, is the protection of individuals. For whatever reason, it's very easy for people to get trapped in a drug-fueled world of prostitution, theft, and dirty deeds done to people unnecessarily. And a lot of it comes down to poverty. That's a big driver. And, unfortunately, poverty leads to begging, theft, prostitution, and drugs, all kinds of crimes. And from there, society's left to pick up the pieces. And I would argue that $1 spent in prevention is, $10, $100 down the track of picking up the mess at the bottom of the cliff when it's all gone horribly wrong. So prevention is the way to go, and, we really need to stamp out nasty drugs like this, and, whatever it takes. It doesn't matter what you've got to do to get rid of this, because, this is responsible for terrible suffering and even death in society. And turning away, turning your back, saying it's not my problem and it doesn't affect me, I can guarantee you, if you take that attitude, it's only a matter of time before it will come to your door in some way. So it is everybody's responsibility to work together as a society to ensure that we look after our most vulnerable, and they are the poorest, those isolated from society, who have no real security. And this leads on to my next point, which is food security. What became absolutely apparent over the COVID-19 incident, and has always been apparent to people like me, is that mankind is only ever 4 meals away from starvation, and should things break down, and we saw it stretched where supermarket shelves were being completely cleaned out by people panic buying because they had no stores to begin with, but they were the lucky people who had the money. And to see those greedy people piling up supermarket shopping trolleys, the jumbo ones, as high as they could pile them. Dear Lord, I mean, I was looking at people buying enough food to keep me going for 3 and even some cases 6 months. And these people were just going in there without any consideration for anyone else and just grabbing what they could and piling it high. And a lot of people, especially the emergency workers and that, were going in to find that the supermarket shelves had been cleaned out after they've been working so hard to keep everybody safe. We all know how unfair that sort of thing is, but it's not just about unfairness. It's about the fact that when you act with such extreme greed, you are hurting others around you. You are making your fellow man and women suffer as a result of your selfishness. And this is something I think started to come out, this idea of kindness, which is something, again, which I have been banging on about for years. This affects the mental health of people in society too, about the fact that whether or not they feel cared for, and therefore their attitude towards society and their likelihood to cooperate with everybody is far lessened if they feel disenfranchised and disengaged from society. So it's about inclusiveness and caring about everybody, saying you are not greater or lesser because of the job you do or the station you hold in society. We are all equal, all of us, regardless of religion, creed or colour. All of us have equal rights and should be able to expect an equal degree of care and respect in society. Unfortunately, when you're on a benefit, you're considered to be less of a human being and treated accordingly, to the point where a government agency controls your life, to the point where they determine whether or not you can engage in a relationship with somebody. If you decide that you want to live with somebody, then you're forced to live on less money, and you're already below the poverty line to start with. So, unfortunately, a lot of people on benefits lie about their situations or are forced to live apart for purely financial reasons, and I would argue that that is against people's human rights. You should not be financially punished because you decide that you want to have a normal relationship with a person. That surely flies in the face of fairness and decency. To say you can have a relationship with someone if you have a job, but you can't if you don't. I mean, that is the bottom line, and that is wrong. We all know that's wrong, and that is one of the small things that needs to change in society. But more importantly to me right now is the matter of food security for the poor. Two things need to happen. One, the government needs to use the civil defence, because that's all they have at the moment, unfortunately, to ensure that we can stockpile enough food to keep everybody fed for the interim when, and I'm not saying if, but when the next problem occurs. Now, it could be a tsunami, it could be an earthquake, it could be another outbreak of disease. We are not ready as far as food and shelter goes, and we need to be. Unfortunately, the way that our system works, our local governments are utterly ineffectual, and they are the ones who should be coordinating any kind of emergency on a regional basis in coordination with the civil defence. But unfortunately, that piece of the jigsaw puzzle has never been put in place. Councillors simply sit back like pigs at a trough and scoff away and do as little as possible and create as many problems as they can for people in society, making them jump through hoops and comply with regulations. And they are basically just self-serving and have no interest whatsoever in their societies who they're supposed to serve. So this needs to change at an intellectual level, at a mental level, at a governmental level to ensure that local government becomes far more effective and instead of being an obstacle, actually becomes an asset to society, and that is majorly needed. That overhaul is probably 50 years overdue now, 5 decades. So how long it's going to take, people haven't even begun to think about it or talk about it yet, and it is something that is required with all urgency. And the reason I say that is because most councils have land available, lots and lots and lots of land, which they could allow the poor to work to feed themselves and thereby get some food security, and they could also stockpile things like rice and pasta so that everyone has enough to eat when the shit hits the fan, which it inevitably will. So there's some food for thought. Eradication of vicious drugs and food security for the poor. Those are 2 major things that we need to do. And the other thing we need to do is to ensure that we use the army correctly to ensure people's safety when things like pandemics do break out. Unfortunately, they were not used quick enough. Now they're expecting the police to do the job. The police are strapped and short. We have hundreds and hundreds of soldiers who are more than capable of doing a job of guarding places. I mean, that's what they're trained to do, and unfortunately have not been utilised. And I would have thought that someone like Ron Mark would have been standing up shouting from the rafters about how his boys are ready to rock. But unfortunately that's not happened. So once again, that's a piece of the jigsaw puzzle missing that really the politicians need to roll up their sleeves and get sorted out. Okay, well, that's enough of my ranting for now. I think there's some food for thought about kindness in society, food security, being ready and re-coordinating our society to better utilise local government and things like the army, who have always been available to us. So those are some of the things that I would like everyone to think about. What can you do? Well, for starters, you can ensure that you have some degree of food security yourself. It costs roughly $15 for a 5 kilo sack of rice, which will keep basically forever. That's 100 meals for $15. That's $1.50 a meal. I think everyone can afford that and really needs to think about, if it hits the fan, what have I got to keep us going? And, you want to be having more than just a freezer of meat, because that just isn't going to last long, is it? So that's something to think about. Well, my show's not just about mental health and the problems in society and how we need to address them. My show's also about my journeys overseas and my trips around New Zealand, and the reason I do this is just to emphasise the fact that just because someone suffers from mental health issues, from obsessive compulsive disorder, bipolar and depression as I do, it doesn't necessarily mean the end. You can certainly achieve a lot in your life, you can do a lot, and it's just a matter of believing in yourself when others don't, and that is the most important part, is to look after yourself, to love yourself, not in a Narcissian way, but to respect yourself and try and achieve things regardless of what might be put in your way. Certainly I've seen a lot of people a lot worse off than me that have achieved great things in their lives, and it all comes down to what's between your ears and what's in your heart, really. It is possible to achieve great things regardless of what setbacks you may initially have to face. I travelled a lot when I was a young man, and it was a good thing for me to do, because I never would have lasted if I hadn't been able to go out there and have some adventures. I lived in Africa for a couple of years. I spent 5 years in London touring Europe, and I learned a lot about the world, a lot about people, and I guess it stood me in good stead over the years. This particular story today is called the Kalahari and the Chobe River, which is, of course, in Botswana, which is a wonderful, wonderful country of somewhat poor, understandable. The Kalahari is a hell of a desert, and she's a tough old place for people to live, but, they are wonderful people over there. I was treated so well by all the wonderful folks in Botswana, and I remember them very, very fondly, and this story brings back some good memories, so let's crack on with it. The Kalahari and Chobe River. 4 of us struck out north from Pretoria, South Africa. We headed for the thirsty land of the Kalahari. CD, Wayne, Dame and myself had bought a car in Johannesburg and were driving up the Chobe River on the far side of the Kalahari Desert. We planned to drive the length of the Kalahari to one of the 3 great river systems in the north. Our aim was the Chobe National Game Park in Botswana. Our first day's drive from Pretoria was a mixture of exhilaration and trepidation. At first there was the reassurance of farms and horticulture made possible with irrigation. South Africa, for all of its shortcomings, still had well-organised systems in place which made life possible in tremendous heat. When the Dutch first crossed this place, they named them the Thirsty Lands. Driving over the border from South Africa to southern Botswana was like day to night. Suddenly the desert proper began looking reminiscent of the Australian outback. A large straight motorway led into sandy, rather barren land that had not seen rain or any water in a long time. Occasionally the motorway opened out and doubled as a landing strip for planes. There was very little game about as a result of the little foliage. We saw little in our travels. The little that we saw in our travels looked half-starved. We planned to spend as little as time as possible in the southern parched lands and head for the promise the northern rivers provided. There are 3 great river systems in the north. The Okavango, which starts life in the Angolan heights and floods erratically through northern Botswana. Secondly, the Kuando River starts in Namibia and again erratically floods marshlands until it becomes the Chobe River system in Botswana. The Chobe then meets the mighty Zambezi, which flows down from Zambia, and they become the amazing Victoria Falls on the Zambia-Zimbabwe border. We were heading to the middle river system, where it turns into the Chobe River in a well-established national game park. It boasts some of the greatest concentrations of game anywhere in Africa. The water and grasslands attract hundreds of thousands, even millions of wildebeest and zebra, along with gazelles, kudu, pala, giraffe and so on. They in turn attract lions, leopards, cheetahs and hyena. Most impressive of all, however, are the tens of thousands of elephants this good grazing attracts. But before we reached the grassy lands of the north, we had to battle through the parched south. We pulled into a small town in the middle of nowhere after trying a shortcut which resulted in some damage to the car. Whilst refuelling and getting repairs done, we stopped for a Coke and were mobbed by about 100 local kids. We were told most of them had never seen a white man, and they delighted in pinching the hair on our arms to make sure that we were real. The children were full of life and very clean considering the lack of water. But we pushed on hard north, driving from dawn till dark, and managed to stop only a few nights in the desert, camping where and when we had to. After stopping at another nowhere town, CD decided to rattle off a few photographs. Unfortunately, he accidentally photographed mud huts surrounded by razor wire, with a sign saying military installation on it. Before long, a jeep turned up on the scene, and at first the boys on the back of the jeep were holding AK-47s, but were all smiles for the camera. Suddenly, however, the sergeant took exception to what we were doing and angrily demanded to see our film. Smiles suddenly turned to frowns, and suddenly we were facing 4 loaded AK-47s. At first, CD tried to argue with the sergeant, but as things escalated, changed his mind and handed over the camera. The ignorant sergeant then exposed the film to the sunlight, then rolled it up and took our details, promising to return it once checked. This at least diffused the scary situation, and the privates shouldered their weapons. Life is cheap in Africa, and I truly feared for our lives for a few minutes. We couldn't get out of that town fast enough, and it was good to get back on the road up north. After a few more days of motoring through the desert, we finally started to see some green trees and increased amount of scrub and life. Then one day I came around the corner, and all of a sudden 3 elephants were wandering across the motorway, blocking our way. For a few seconds I was too stunned to do anything as these massive animals ambled along. This was our first introduction to the Chobe area, and stunned us all to see these great creatures wandering free in the open. Before long we reached the game park proper, and were surprised to see how little infrastructure there was to the place. There were a few safari-styled places set up, but other than that, no real camps as such. We simply paid to enter, and were free to set up camp anywhere we could. Upon entering the game park, we were blown away by the incredible amounts of life everywhere. Hundreds of species of birds, zebra and wildebeest in their countless thousands. Antelopes like gazelle, the huge impala, and the impressive kudu with its corkscrew horns, all of them in massive numbers. Many other game like giraffes and hippos were also common along the river. But the most impressive of all was the vast numbers of elephants wandering freely. All of these animals in turn attract huge numbers of predators like lions, cheetahs and leopards. Our first day in the Chobe National Game Park, we met up with some hunters who told us they were culling elephants. The numbers were too great to sustain, and they were devastating the bush habitat. They were culling whole family units at a time so as to cause as little disruption as possible. We found it hard to believe that such wholesale slaughter was necessary, although their explanation was compelling. On the river itself we saw elephants to the red horizon. Nothing could have prepared us for that magnificent sight. As the sun slowly lowered red to the horizon, the elephants came down to bathe. Even the grumpy hippo were forced to give up the best parts of the river. The elephants truly revel joyously in this time. They play with their young, free in their great numbers from any predator. Instead, the lions hide hidden in the long grasses, watching patiently for an opportunity of easier prey. Life on the river runs like clockwork, and each animal that needed water has its turn. On our first day on the Chobe River, we caught the last half of the day. We found a flat patch of grass at around lunchtime. We were immediately robbed of biscuits by monkeys when we stopped for a feed. Dozens of baboons descended on the scene after the monkeys, and we quickly learned to leave nothing out for the robbers to have. The male baboons were particularly large and intimidating, with huge fangs, and showed little fear of man. The best way to spot game was from the relative safety of the car, so after setting up our tents we set off on the unsealed sandy, bumpy roads. I was a designated driver by now, and the roads were sorely testing. I quickly learned the most dangerous time to drive was driving through a family group of elephants. The young ones, ranging from about 1 to 2 tonne, would suddenly charge head first towards us. These mock charges were truly frightening, and the only way to stop them is to plant boot and charge at them. The dust and the roar of the engine puts them off, but I had to be careful not to hit them, as 4-tonne Mum was always looking on. The large bull elephants, however, the tuskers, must be avoided at all costs. They are short-tempered, huge, and run surprisingly quickly. We watched them bulldoze whole trees down and strip them of leaves. The amount of devastation they caused was unbelievable. After spending the afternoon game spotting, we returned to camp to cook tea. As we cooked up what we had on the riverside camp, a family of warthogs with their huge tusks came trotting past us and into their burrows in the riverbed. The water flowed quickly at this point, so there were no crocodiles about. At the same time, I felt very vulnerable in our makeshift camp. I didn't sleep at all well, and at about 2 a.m. something came sniffing at my head. With only a millimetre of plastic between us, I was frozen with fear. The creature then moved off, and I fell into a whiskey-induced sleep. I woke at the dawn chorus of birds and general wildlife. I poked my head out of the tent to watch our warthog neighbours trot past on their way out. 4 of us headed out after breakfast. We spent all day driving around game spotting, and before long Dave spotted a lioness in the long grass. I stopped and hopped out for a better look, but could not see her. I walked forward, and again I did not see her until she blinked. By then it became suddenly obvious that she could run me down, so I slowly backed up without unlocking eye contact. It was the first and last time I made that mistake in Africa. We had a great day game spotting with loads of beautiful antelope to watch, along with any big cats that might be following. The middle of the day was too hot, however, for the cats, and the game was left to graze in freedom. Generally speaking, only the young and very old are most vulnerable, as they are cold from the herd most often. We then headed back to camp for tea and sunset. A huge number of elephants came down to the river each sunset for a bathe and turned on an amazing show. Our campsite was perfectly elevated for viewing up the river with binoculars. The sight of at least 120 animals in the lenses was something no zoo or wildlife centre could ever have prepared me for. Slowly, as I got used to being surrounded by wildlife, the adventure became more enjoyable. We clicked into a routine of getting up at dawn and driving around game spotting each day. We soon learned the best spots near our camp, and no 2 days were ever quite the same. One hot afternoon we were watching a huge bull elephant bulldoze down trees. He had a particularly huge set of tusks and made for some great photographs. Suddenly Wayne decided he needed a good close-up and jumped out of the car and approached the huge beast. The elephant suddenly turned his attentions from the tree he was eating to Wayne. The bull stamped his massive foot and flared his great ears with warning, but Wayne remained oblivious, happily snapping off some great shots. The bull then trumpeted, stamped its huge foot, and it was all too late for Wayne as he began to charge. "I'm out of here," I shouted to Wayne and turned away, planting boot as I went. Wayne made a sudden sprint for the car and managed to dive head first through the passenger side open window as I spun the wheel. As I roared off, my foot flat to the floor, all I could see was a huge elephant's head in the rear vision mirror. I could feel the ground shaking as he charged after us. Luckily, I had just enough power to out-sprint the bull and slowly pull away from him with Wayne hanging halfway out the window, far too close for comfort. Luckily enough, there were no more incidents at camp, so we were able to adapt to a routine on the river. Each morning our warthog neighbours would parade past at dawn as we made breakfast. We spent each day trying to spot new species as well as our favourites. Pretty much every species had some impressive attribute, from the grace of the antelope to the stealth of their predators, to the massive horned water buffalo, the ugly-looking wildebeest, the beautiful zebra and all the other grazers. The most impressive of all, however, were the massive elephants with their huge tusks and trunks. To my mind at least, they were the true kings of the jungle. Despite the hardships we had to endure, our time at Chobe was over too soon. But I feel we left a little piece of ourselves there, and we took a little piece of that place with us. I look back on those days wistfully now, and I'm sure the 3 guys I travelled with feel the same. The end. Well, that's it for another day. Thanks for tuning in. and I will catch you again very shortly. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you to the wonderful people in the Hawke's Bay, the Wairarapa. Thanks to Michael and Veronica, to Wairarapa TV and all our sponsors. I'll catch you again next week. Bye for now.